I remember the day very clearly because I went out for my early morning run.
We had worked that night, so we were coming off shift.
And I was an engineer for the academy, the 2001 academy.
And there was just some talk between the recruits. Hey, did you hear about the plane hit the tower and stuff like that?
I was actually sitting in a classroom and the teachers told us, school's gonna be canceled for the day. Your parents are gonna come pick you up. And then I realized this is a big deal.
My daughters were home because school hadn't started yet. They weren't in school till later that day. And so just watching them watch the news too and trying to explain what was going on was very difficult. And just what was going on in our country. It was an extremely sad moment.
Well, 9/11 for me, I was, I believe, 10 years old. So I actually remember it. I'm of that generation that remembers it. And for me, I distinctly remember driving to school. And I was just young enough where I wasn't quite sure what was going on when we were listening to the radio.
Right when I was pulling into the academy grounds, right, because we got to be there at a certain time, is when one of the radio hosts, because it was where we got most of our information at the time, was on the radio, started talking about how a plane had hit the tower. And it really hadn't talked about much about whether it was a terrorist attack or what it was, just that a plane in New York had hit the tower.
I was on duty at Station 209 that day. I had been on a little over 10 years. As a firefighter, and we had worked that night, so we were coming off shift, and that's when we started seeing the news reports as to what was going on. And as I recall, we actually saw one of the planes go into the building live on the news at the time, and just remember being devastated.
And then within a couple minutes, the second plane hit the tower, and that just changed everything. I mean, we realized that it wasn't just a plane into a building for a high-rise, but a terrorist attack.
And our RTOs at the time, the recruit training officers, had been on the job 25, 30 years and stuff like that. So they understood the significance of what that meant, that there was a terrorist attack, it had hit the towers, and that all these first responders were actually deploying to these locations, right? So we had our police officers, our EMTs, and our firefighters. They understood the magnitude of that operation and what was unfolding. But of course, us as new recruits maybe didn't quite understand what this all meant for our future and moving forward in the fire service.
But at the same time, there was every walk of life working in that building that everybody could relate to, whether it be a secretary, a janitor, cooks, people working in all levels of every industry within that building.
And it was a difficult couple minutes. I mean, and at the same time, I'm thinking about all the men and women inside. So it was hard.
It was a very heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching feeling knowing what those guys were going through.
My dad, who is currently an LA City firefighter, was on the job then. So that was really the first time that it hit home how dangerous his job is. The reality that could be him. So I think the combination of all of that made me realize how significant this event was.
And, Chief Compton was our fire chief at the time, and we started talking about with the team, what are our next steps? What do we need to do? Is there something we need to do? Even though it's happening there, are there other things we need to do?
And it was interesting to see really everybody come together in the United States and kind of even around the world to a certain extent to support this rescue effort and the recovery, right?
It was a whole nother phase of understanding what was going on, and especially for those guys that were still working there in New York City and for the fire department and the police and all the other agencies. They were there digging their brothers out and just putting yourself in their shoes and thinking, what if we had to do that?